I was gonna start this video off by saying I just had some Nutella, but I think you can tell. Let's just pretend that never happened. Well, hello friends. This is the second time I'm filming this video because the first time I tried to film it was diarrhea. 2017 was a really wacky year for me. It was pretty horrible. However, I did manage to read 137 books. So all in all, as far as a reading year, not bad. I will say that maybe like 40 of those 137 books were like graphic novels or poetry or like picture books. So take from that what you will. As always, I've never really done the top 16 of 2016 or the top 17 of 2017. I've just compiled a list of stuff that I really enjoyed that stuck out from other books, and I'm going to talk about them. I'm going to begin with some honorable mentions, which are all books that I gave 4 or 5 stars, really enjoyed. They just weren't new favorites of all time. First is The Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis, a book about a girl who's going to kill her sister's rapist. Very feminist and powerful. The next is The Sun is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. It's about a Jamaican immigrant who is getting deported, and the book takes place over 24 hours before that happens, where she meets a boy. It's written beautifully, it tackles important topics, and I think that it's a standout book in the YA contemporary genre, which I don't read ever at all anymore. Next is Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. Again, another contemporary that I picked up even though I'm not a huge fan of the genre anymore. It's really popular, so I'm sure you've heard of it, but it's about this gay teen at his school who is being blackmailed because someone found out that he's gay, and high school shenanigans ensue, as well as in his coming out story. I thought it was witty without being cheesy, and it was a really honest representation of high school life. The next book is Reason Number 1 by Briston Brooks. This is a self-published book that I'm sure none of you have heard of, so you really have to go check it out. It's about this boy who's going to college or boarding school, I can't quite remember. He's coming to terms with his sexuality, meeting a new friend group, and just going through life. I would call this book a hybrid between The Raven Boys and Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, so if you enjoyed both of those, then this is a really atmospheric, character-driven book. Next is actually 2 books, Lady Midnight and Lord of Shadows. Cassandra Clare is just so talented at creating characters that you care about and world building, and I can't wait to read the third one. They're really well-crafted books. And my final honorable mention is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which I read for class, but it still is one of the most meaningful books I've ever read that talks about the Vietnam War, PTSD, and it's not the type of war book you would expect. And now for my official list of books that were my favorites in 2017. I said this list wasn't going to be in any specific order, but I think if I were to have to choose one thing that was the best thing I've read all year, it's these. It's The Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. They are very popular books, and if you're intimidated by the hype, do not be, because I cannot stress to you how game-changing these books are. The expectations that I have for YA fantasy now is astronomical. The book follows 6 characters who are all part of this group that defeats corruption in their fantasy town. The leader being Kaz Brecker, who is just this mastermind of heists. It's just such an atmospheric, character-driven, yet artfully done series. The strategy behind it and the way that the plot is driven is just so smart. And the characters themselves, even though they all have tragic backstories and they live these gruesome lives, they still have a realness to them that makes them pop off the page. The book is diverse, the book is gorgeously crafted. I just think it checks every box and every single person should check it out. The next book I have to talk about is one of the first memoirs I read this year that got me into the genre, and it was Wild by Cheryl Strayed. The author of this book is a woman who, after going through a divorce, decides that she wants to hike the Pacific Coast Trail all by herself. It's her journey of self-discovery, not just physically going through a journey, but mentally. It's kind of a mature coming-of-age story, if you will. I listen to most memoirs in audiobook, and this is probably one of the most recommendable audiobooks that I've ever listened to, because you just feel like you're there with her on the trail, and the people she meets on the trail you feel like you're acquaintances with as well. You're rooting for her the entire book, and even when she goes back in her memories and tells you about her life, it's never boring. It's such a pleasant reading experience. There's enough action to level out the introspectiveness of it, and I just think that everyone should pick it up, especially if you're into memoirs. The next book I have to recommend is The Art of Sleeping Alone by Sophie Fontanelle. This is a book translated from French, and it's about a woman who decided to give up sex, and it was all about her journey of self-love and learning to rely on herself and not others and find validation in other ways. This book has like 2 stars on Goodreads, which is so confusing to me because it was a 5-star book for me and I cannot recommend it enough. It's a very short book and the chapters are only 2 or 3 pages long, and it's little sections that talk about the people around her and their relationships versus her. There's entire sections devoted to self-love and figuring out how to put yourself first rather than a romantic partner, and so if you can get your hands on it, I think it's a really enlightening read, and I don't understand why it has such a low rating because I seriously thought it was something special. The next book is 3-Day Road by Joseph Boyden, which again is a book I read for my war literature class. This book follows two characters who are Indigenous Canadians that go off to fight in World War I. Even though it's a war story and you're going through the battles with them, it's very character based. The reason why this sticks with me is because there's a dichotomy of two characters. One of them is super eager to go off to war. He wants to shed his Indigenous past and become a warrior, defy stereotypes about his heritage, and just kill people. The other character goes along with him sort of as a sidekick, and he's more of a wallflower character. He loves his heritage. He wants to go back home. He's just doing everything he can to make it by and survive, and he's not there to kill people. He doesn't want to be a warrior. And it's about them, how the madness of war can affect or corrupt you. And I wrote a 10-page paper about this book just because it was so fascinating to me, the dynamics of the characters and the way that the plot shapes them. If you're a sucker for character-driven books and you don't mind the gore of a war book, I highly recommend picking this up. The next book I have to recommend is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is a book that follows Patroclus and Achilles' relationship in the Greek or Trojan War. But this is a story about them growing up and then later going on to fight in the war. It's a gorgeously written book that's so atmospheric. It really fits the vibe of this ancient Greek god. It's one of those books that's so subtle. You don't realize the attachment you have to it until you're up at 3 a.m. reading it and you can't forget the characters. If you know nothing about Greek mythology, you don't need to. It speaks for itself and it speaks loudly. It is a very memorable book and I love it. I loved it. Next isn't really one book in particular, it's actually a genre that I delved into this year. Poetry. Poetry for me this year has been very experimental. I really like modern poetry, but I'm super picky about what I read, so it was a lot of trial and error. For me, poetry, if it's gonna be short, needs to have purpose, and it needs to be phrased in a way that hasn't been done before, that puts a new spin on ideas that have been written about for centuries. I just need variety, no cliche, a good use of metaphor and other literary devices, and I'm happy. I'll link my poetry folder on Goodreads down below so you can see what I rated everything, but here's some highlights from me that I read this year. First of all, something that was a surprise to me, which is The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. If you know me, I did not like Milk and Honey, but this was a pleasant surprise. I think that this took that short poem style and packed it with meaning. Although by no means is this book perfect, I still think it was a huge step up from Milk and Honey, and she got into topics such as being a woman of color, being a writer, being an immigrant. Whereas I felt like Milk and Honey read just as one big Tumblr post, this has so much richness and depth to it that I wasn't expecting. So if you weren't a fan of Milk and Honey, I would recommend trying this one out because I felt it had a lot more going for it. Next is No Matter the Wreckage by Sarah Kay, which is a book I gave 5 stars because the subject matters were so diverse and she discussed different things with each poem, and she discussed them all in a light that I'd never considered before. So it was a very thought-provoking collection for me. I just think she's very masterful at her craft. I would read anything else that Sarah Kay writes because she's really talented. The next book is Counting Descent by Clint Smith, which is a collection from a black man talking about his African-American heritage. I'm gonna be real with you, I don't remember a ton about this collection other than I remember how I felt when I was reading it, which is every single page just affected me. I remember I was underlining and highlighting so many things in this book, so many points made me think. It's a short collection, but it's packed full of power, and that's what I loved most about it. The last poetry book that I recommend is Idiot Verse by Keaton Henson. Keaton Henson is one of my favorite singers, so I'm a little bit biased. But this collection is kind of different from the others because it's not really that modern poetry free verse style. It follows rhyme scheme more often than not, and the only way that I can describe this is quaint. Because they're mostly love poems or poems about anxiety or mental health or being an artist, there's this vulnerability to it that feels like you're reading his diary, and it's jarringly beautiful. That's how I would describe this book. It just feels like you're in a cottage with him and he's reading out loud to you, and it's love poems that are cozy but sad. The melancholy that encompasses this collection is just so made me just want to fly to London and give him a hug. Even if you're not a fan of his music, check it out. Okay, back to regular books. Another series I have to recommend to you is the A Darker Shade of Magic series by V.E. Schwab. This is a series that follows a main character who can navigate between parallel Londons. One of them is Black London, which is dark and evil and we don't go there. And then there's 3 other different Londons that have different people and kings and rulers and rules. The series follows this conflict of that black evil London starting to seep into the other worlds, and Cal has to be the one to stop it. It's just one of those books where the characters drive it. Can you tell I love character-based books? They just jump off the page at you. You want to be in there with them going on their adventures. The worlds are all crafted so intriguingly and differently. This is technically categorized as an adult fantasy series, but I think it's totally accessible to YA readers, so definitely check it out. I have 2 graphic novels to mention. The first is actually a manga. It's Orange by Ishigo Takano. This series follows a high schooler who has a really close-knit friend group, and this new guy comes to school, joins their friend group, and the main character gets a letter from herself 10 years in the future saying, hey, this friend of yours is going to commit suicide. Here are steps you need to take in order to make sure that you're recognizing the signs of his suicidal thoughts. So it's this book about suicide prevention, but it's also about friendship and time travel and being there for people when they need you most. And at the same time that it's really lighthearted and fun and the friends are also funny and happy together, there's this really meaningful message to it about how to recognize depression and how to be there for your best friends. It was written in like 2016, so all the art is really modern. I think it was really well done, easy to follow. A heartfelt series that makes you laugh, makes you cry. There's only 2 collections, so it goes by pretty fast. And the graphic novel I have to recommend you is the Paper Girls series, which I know is written by Brian K. Vaughan. I don't remember the other people that worked on it off the top of my head. The best way I can describe this book or the series is Saga meets Stranger Things. It's set in the 80s. It's about a girl group who are all really close-knit friends, and they discover this time travel thing. There's aliens, there's time travel, there's sci-fi stuff. If you like Stranger Things, you're going to like this. The art is gorgeous. The girls are so fun. The last favorite that I have this year is an ongoing series, and it's the Conquerors Saga, otherwise known as And I Darken and Now I Rise, all by Kirsten White. This is a historical fiction series, which is not my typical genre, but it's a Vlad the Impaler retelling. It follows 2 main characters. The Vlad the Impaler character is named Lotta. She and her younger brother Radu are shipped off to the Ottoman Empire to live there because their father has bartered them off for a peace treaty thing. And it's about them growing up in the Ottoman Empire. They become friends with the Sultan's son Mehmed. The series follows them as they grow up, and book 2 follows the fall of Constantinople. Even though this is historical fiction and it sounds like it might be political or plot driven, again, the characters. The dynamic between Lotta and Radu is a little bit similar to the 3-Day Road dynamic, where they're such opposite people, and following both of them is just absolutely fascinating. Lotta is this female character who doesn't care about what anyone says about her. She does what she wants to do. She has no fear of consequences. She's ruthless. She has periods. She has casual sex. It's like the realest, grittiest character that's also in this morally gray area too, because she's so ruthless and will kill anyone to get what she wants. Whereas Radu is her opposite, and he just wears his heart on his sleeve. He's emotional, he's sensitive, he's going through an inner battle of which culture does he belong to, which religion does he belong to, what sexuality is he. And because I love both of the characters equally, the plot just flies by. I root for both of them throughout the duration of the novels. They're fantastic audiobooks, they're fantastic physical reads. I can't wait for the 3rd book to come out and see where it goes from here. Okie dokie, so that was everything that I've read this year and thought was the best. Based on what my favorites are, if you have any recommendations for me, let me know. Hopefully 2018 will continue to have a lot of great books in store for me. Have a good life, everyone.